3 more minutes and then we'll get started if that works. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
You don't need audio, turn your mute yourself.
the Executive Director of Duxbury Beach Preservation. And welcome to tonight's welcome to tonight's community forum. Thanks. So the timing couldn't be better for this, you know, hearing twice. How's that? Yeah, meeting twice here. Microphone. Yes. Great. Timing couldn't be to get better, I think, for this forum because of last weekend's historic flooding. Does anybody remember that? Yeah. I like to say as the tides recede, so do people's memories. So that it didn't cause the storm. None of us at Duxbury Beach Reservation or the state did, but it is really important, these topics we're speaking about tonight, and I think because of last weekend, it's all still fresh in our minds. A couple logistics before we start. The bathrooms are located behind me. Make sure that if you didn't, you check in with our registration, and that makes sure that you get all of our up-to-date emails and next events coming. And I'm going to ask folks to hold their questions to the end because all the speakers will be up here as a panel, so you can speak to everybody for their questions that you have, and we've left plenty of room for that. Tonight we're going to be hearing from 4 experts discussing a range of topics. Let's see. No, we're good. A range of topics covering everything from coastal resiliency to specific projects on Duxbury Beach Reservation. There's a teaser at the end for our next community forum, which is such a big topic. To be honest, we're going to need, well, we could do it in probably 6 sessions, but we'll do a whole session on that at the end of February for about an hour. But Brenda McGlathry will be speaking about that at the end as well. So really quickly tonight, I wanted to just ridiculously quickly go over DVR reservation. Can't really skip that just in case folks don't know. We're a private organization, been a public charity for quite a few years. It's volunteer run for 98 years up until 2017. I like to remind everybody it's because of 16 families that came before us that purchased all of the property to ensure public access and that it wouldn't be turned into a development. So we owe those people a gratitude for our barrier beach. The reservation owns approximately 4.5 miles, which encompasses over 350 acres. And that is in the town of Duxbury as well as Plymouth. The big piece that folks should take away with is that we have a 3-part mission. It's in our articles of incorporation. And we like to boil it down to preserve, protect, and enjoy. We're here talking about the first one tonight, preserving the landform, making sure that the land that we have, the barrier that we know, stays in some sort of relative shape. I don't want to say that we can maintain it exactly how it is. But ensure that the landform maintains its size. I say that because, you know, what happened last weekend, a lot of people focus on Oceanside, but the impacts were really to the Bayside, which is a different ecology, different habitats, cobble berms, salt marshes. So no matter where the wind is blowing or the storm surge happens, has a different impact. And if you saw some of the photos that were just shown, seeing the clearance of Powder Point Bridge being 6 inches below the deck of the bridge was something I'm not going to forget. Without the landform, we don't have our other 2 mission pieces, and that's protecting the ecology, the wildlife and vegetation on the beach, and ensuring that people are welcome. And again, that is our whole history. So it wouldn't become private and a 350-person development, home development. It was maintained and still maintains to be open to the public. I'm glad that all of you are here because, as I said, tonight is really a powerhouse and perfect timing. We have 4 different speakers, and I want to just introduce them quickly. I'm going to introduce them specifically as they speak, but the three groups that'll be represented is Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management, Woods Hole Group, that Duxbury Beach Reservation works in hand along the CZM, and then the reservation of Brennan McGlaffrey. Now I put on glasses, so I introduce people properly. First, we're going to be speaking or hearing from Patricia Bowie. Patricia is a coastal resilience specialist with the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management, a group that is near and dear to Duxbury Beach Reservation's heart, as they've supported us for many, many years with grants to the state. Patricia began working at CZM in 2014, and she manages the CZM's Coastal Resilience Grant Program and helps provide technical assistance to coastal communities on addressing issues related to coastal flooding, erosion, and sea level rise. Basically, when we have a problem or a question, Trisha's our first step. And she's always our last step. She knows it all. She didn't tell me the right minute that, by the way. Prior to her role at CZM, Trisha worked with the New York State Coastal Program and was a NOAA Coastal Management Fellow, where she helped develop post-storm redevelopment guidance for communities affected by Hurricane Sandy. That must have been pretty busy. Trisha will be talking tonight about the importance of coastal banks, barrier beaches and dunes, and the coastal processes and human alterations along the coast that affect landform functions. Trisha is also going to be highlighting the benefit of nourishment projects to help enhance and restore natural systems. Trisha is also accompanied by India Mackinson. India is also with CZM. She's a coastal resilience grant specialist who joined in 2023. India offers technical assistance in coastal resilience, community engagement, environmental justice, and administers the Office of Coastal Resilience Grant Program. India previously worked in municipal government and earned her Master of Environmental Management from Duke and a Bachelor's of Arts in Environmental Studies from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So you moved across the street. She'll be presenting on coastal processes and regional resilience with Trisha. And if you could just join me in welcoming them, and then I'll introduce the other speakers as they come up.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. It's a pleasure to be with you all and see so many faces. Tonight, I am going to be talking about coastal barriers, coastal banks and dunes, and the coastal processes that affect their functioning. So the Massachusetts coast is characterized by glacial deposits. And much of the glacial deposits provide sediment supply to their high banks that provide sediment supply to lower lying beaches and dunes. And this is unique kind of to Massachusetts and this area, that they are the dominant regional sediment supply to beaches and dunes. I'm going to just hone in on coastal barriers since we are here at Duxbury Beach. These are narrow strips of land that are separated from the mainland by a body of water, which kind of are connected to the mainland. They're mostly comprised of coastal beaches and coastal dunes. And also, sometimes we tend to forget because we don't see it all the time, the land under the ocean, which is covered by the water during the tides. These are really parts of a whole system working together to provide functions of the barrier beach, which are storm damage prevention and flood control, especially to the mainland coastline. So these are not parts that are working independent of each other. They are working together as a system. This system really needs that sediment from the coastal banks to be able to provide those functions. Along the Massachusetts coast, the primary force shaping the coastline is through waves and wind. And there are two main mechanisms over which the waves shape the coastline. One is through longshore transport and one is through cross-shore transport. So for longshore transport, this is when waves are approaching the shoreline at an angle. As they approach and crash in the surf zone, that is energy that is released in the form of a longshore current. If there is sufficient energy as the waves are breaking, it mobilizes sediment within the water column, and that sediment is what drifts along parallel to the shoreline with that current. So for the South Shore, this is typically in a north-south direction. Also, the cross-shore movement of sediment happens with sand moving onshore and offshore. This is largely seasonal and storm-driven. In the summer months when it's a little bit calmer, we don't have as many storms affecting the coastline. The waves bring the sand on shore. It helps build the dunes up, and that's what we refer to as a summer profile. In the winter months, it's a little stormier outside and we have higher energy waves pulling the sediment back offshore. The sediment is not gone from the system. The sediment is collecting in offshore sandbars. And I think what's important to understand is that although the sediment is not on the beach, when it is in those offshore bars, there is still a resilience benefit to this whole system working. So this is helping to trip the waves up before they approach the shoreline. So this is the winter profile. This movement is in sediment transport. This is anticipated and predictable, and this is what projects plan for. This image just illustrates again that concept of the onshore and offshore sediment transport. So you can see just offshore, the sand being still in the system. It's in the nearshore environment that's collecting in the sandbars. For the South Shore region, the dominant coastal processes are shown in these frames. From Brant Rock to Duxbury, which is in the middle frame of here, the dominant process is the cross-shore and long-shore sediment transport and wind transport. So we have wind bringing the sand up from the beach and into the dunes. The dunes help trap the sand with enough vegetation. So these are what we call littoral cells, and within these cells, each has its own kind of sediment source and sink and transport mechanism. But it doesn't mean that the sediment is confined within here, because these are all cells that are part of an even larger, more regional littoral cell. So there is still sediment being transported all along the coast and in between these specific cells or compartments along the beach. And this is important because we have a number of nourishment projects that are going on, and all of these together provide a real cumulative benefit to the whole region. So erosion is a natural process. It's not, necessarily a bad thing, but we do have a lot of development. Much of the coast is developed, and over the years, we have built hard engineering structures to help protect the upland development. A lot of the South Shore, as you can see in the map, is armored with coastal engineering structures. These have a number of reasons for building these, but there are some unintended consequences of putting up the hard structures. Essentially, this walls off the fronting beach and cuts off the sediment supply to the beaches and dunes, which need that sediment in order to function. Additionally, waves transport energy. So as waves approach the shoreline, that energy has to go somewhere. When they crash on a beach, the waves spread out, the energy is dissipated. When waves come up and hit a vertical concrete seawall, it doesn't absorb the energy. The energy, as you can see in the picture on the bottom, goes up and over in the form of waves, up and over the seawalls, but it's also going down. And that downward energy tends to lower the beach elevation due to the scouring and erosion at the toe of the seawall. So you have erosion going on both horizontally and vertically. All of these locations in these photos have seawalls running down. And as we're all familiar with, we're still experiencing extreme flooding and wave battery in these locations. So the key to reducing damages is making sure we do have enough sediment in front of the seawalls to be able to be that breaker for the waves, so that they can absorb energy before it hits the seawall. And this image, again, just underpins the vulnerability of the region. These are concentrations of repetitive lost properties in the South Shore region. And I think this underscores just the need for communities to be working to address their climate vulnerabilities. And I'm going to throw it to India next. We will talk about resilience.
Hi, everyone. I'm India Magnuson. So like Trisha has alluded to, all of these coastal processes will be exacerbated due to climate change because of sea level rise and storm surge, and due to the increased frequency and intensity of storms. So the impacts broadly of climate change in Massachusetts would include natural resource degradation, coastal property infrastructure damage, disruption of the local economy, and public health and safety threats. So there is something we can do about all of this. We're not completely helpless. In fact, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is already planning for these increased impacts through coastal resilience. Coastal resilience is a community's ability to bounce back from a disaster. So it is linked really closely with emergency management, which is these two middle tiles right here, but it's more long-term and comprehensive, though they are, like I said, closely tied together. So we can plan and build for coastal resilience and recover from and adapt our communities to be better prepared for the next storm. And there are a variety of different avenues we can take to do so. So the Commonwealth is approaching coastal resilience through these areas. One is the development and building standards in vulnerable areas, which addresses more new development and can take the form of tightening building codes to be more flood resilient, or planning communities away from the coast. For existing infrastructure and communities, the state is really investing in adaptation projects, which can be more construction focused and help people stay in place as long as possible. And the state is also beginning to explore and retreat, which would be relocating vulnerable things away from the coast where it's no longer possible or too costly to stay in place and maintain them. So my office addresses these through the Coast Resilience Grant Program, which has funded numerous projects here in DPR and the South Shore. So the goals for our program are to address current coastal flooding and shoreline erosion issues, adapting to future conditions such as heightened sea level rise, increased precipitation, protecting public facilities and infrastructure, providing broad public benefits such as increased access, and supporting the adaptation of environmental justice communities to ensure no one gets left behind. So our grant program has been around since 2014. So we've had 10 grant application cycles to go out, give out money, put out projects, and learn how to improve the program. So over the last 10 years, we've awarded $46 million to 219 projects up and down the coast, along 55 communities in all regions of Massachusetts. And municipalities have provided $17 million in local match to really leverage those funds to create stronger, bigger projects. And the South Shore has seen a significant amount of investment from this program. We have put from this money 49 projects we funded. And 39% of our $46 million has gone directly to the South Shore. Mostly because the South Shore has been really good about really bigger implementation projects such as beach nourishment, which costs a lot more money than vulnerability assessment per se. So all Massachusetts municipalities are eligible to apply for the program, along with nonprofits that are vulnerable to coastal processes such as DBR. The 5 project types we look to fund include detailed vulnerability and risk assessments, public education, proactive planning, redesign retrofits, and shoreline restoration. This last one, shoreline restoration, you'll be learning a lot more about this evening. So one of our first types of projects are detailed risk and vulnerability assessments. These assessments really establish a baseline for coastal communities by telling them exactly where is vulnerable, what are their options, and helps them prioritize what they need to do in their town and plan for the long term. This is something that our program we build off the municipal vulnerability preparedness planning grants that went on over the last few years to really zero in on what communities need to do. So next, we also fund public education and communication, such as this event. That's really important to us to make sure that community members really understand the kinds of impacts and risks that are coming to them. This will help them, we hope that this knowledge will empower them to be able to take action in their communities and build the kind of resilience they want to see in their community, and so to make sure that they have a say in what happens. Next, we have proactive planning. So this is a little bit more with the policy side of things, where we can help municipalities plan for by changing local ordinances, changing their zoning. Like for example, this year in Hull, we're helping fund a study where they decide whether to move really vulnerable public works facilities or not. So looking forward to seeing the results of that. Next, we have redesign and retrofits, and this is more construction-based. We'll actually be moving infrastructure or oftentimes elevating things. We definitely have done a lot of funding of elevating electrical equipment, generators, especially in municipal buildings, and we've also helped not fund moving beach parking lots away from the coast to a less vulnerable area to maintain that access. And finally, there's shoreline restoration, which can be done on both the marsh and beach side. So we're really looking to restoring salt marshes through living shorelines to help prevent erosion from happening on the bay side, and then bigger projects such as beach nourishment on the beach side to help maintain the community's resilience through a more natural way. Okay, and if you want to explore all of our 2019 projects, we do have a really great viewer that we will redid this year. So you can just Google MA/CZM grant viewer, and it should be the first link that pops up. You can filter through all sorts of things, the specific category, the specific region, and year. So there's lots to explore on our website. And that's it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tricia and India. Next up, needs no introduction. It's unusual for Adam and I to be in a climate controlled area because most of our work is done in the winter and on the beach, like today, for an hour and 20 minutes while my boots and socks were staying comfortably warm in my car. Adam is here. Adam Finkel for the Woods Hole Group. He's a coastal scientist and a project manager and has managed several of the projects here in Duxbury Beach. His focus is on designing, permitting, and facilitating the implementation of ecological restoration and coastal resiliency projects throughout New England. I do get annoyed when he says he's going to stop on by because he's at another site. Like there are any others. His work involves identifying vulnerabilities and developing and implementing resiliency building measures and climate adaptation strategies for coastal communities, nonprofit organizations, and private homeowners. Also focused on implementation of nature-based coastal resiliency measures at Duxbury Beach Reservation. I consider Adam very close to being kind of the Daniel Boone, and I mean that as a compliment, though I've never met Daniel myself. And that he is able to look at a dune and see what's happening kind of beyond what they think a lay person would, and then start to go into discussion about what vegetation should be planted, how long the root structure is, and though it might look prettier, Chris, it's not going to hold the dune in place. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Adam Finkel.
Good evening, and thanks for the introduction, Chris. My name's Adam Finkel. I'm a coastal scientist with the Woods Hole Group. As I was listening to Tricia and India give their talks, I was kind of thinking about where I was today, which was split between herring run restoration out in the town of Eastham on the Cape, a wetland delineation that was happening in Sandwich, a beach nourishment project in South Kingstown, Rhode Island, and then the Marshfield Duxbury nourishment project that's ongoing just up the street. Duxbury and Duxbury Beach Reservation are not alone in the coastal impacts that have occurred over the past couple of weeks. It's a regional and really a national issue. And in many ways, even though the impacts can be rather striking, it is an exciting and an interesting field to be involved in. It's probably also the reason why I've got a headache at the moment, and probably also why I could use vacation. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the projects that have been completed at Duxbury Beach Reservation over the past several years. And then the project that's slated for implementation later on this year. And I talked to Chris last night. She said to go with a punchy title, so here we are with rock and roll, mixed sand and cobble nourishment at Duxbury Beach Reservation. So over the past several years, DBR has had an ongoing commitment to resilience and an ongoing investment in the integrity of the barrier beach. And that's a testament to the matching funds that DBR has contributed to maintaining the integrity of that barrier, and also the grant funding that the state Coastal Zone Management Office has provided to the organization. So it really comes back to this 2017 Coastal Processes and Resiliency Study, so planning category grant, that looked at the barrier as a whole, tried to better understand the wind-wave interaction with the barrier and also the currents that impact the barrier on the bay side, and come up with a series of prioritized resiliency building strategies that could be implemented over time to maintain the integrity of the barrier. And it was that guiding principle document that helped Duxbury Beach Reservation to prioritize the actions that they took in 2018, 19, 20, 21, 23, and now here in 24. So the projects that are funded year over year are not chosen at random. It all comes back to this guiding document that both DBR and the state invested in. So in 2018, I was a planning exercise, the development of engineering plans for the crossover 1-2 nourishment project. Those familiar with Gurnett Road probably remember the trucks kind of bouncing down the dirt road, and the dune enhancement project that was implemented between crossovers 1 and 2. That was among the highest priority projects listed in that 2017 study. And the first that DBR chose to act on. In 2019, we leveraged those design engineering plans into a project that was shovel ready. And we constructed that crossover 1-2 nourishment project. And it's worth noting, and I think this is a testament to DBR and to the state's commitment to these types of projects, that project implemented in 19 won the 2023 American Shore and Beach Preservation Association Best Restored Beach, which is a national award given to communities and nonprofit organizations that stand by their beaches and invest in the integrity and resilience of their shores. So that's a big award for DBR. From 2020 to 2021, DBR was heavily invested in comprehensive permitting. So what that means is rather than picking and choosing an individual project year over year to design and then permit and then implement, Duxbury Beach Reservation consolidated all of the projects that they hope to build over the course of time into one comprehensive permit application. And that gives Duxbury Beach Reservation the opportunity to adaptively manage rather than reactively manage the shoreline. So they can respond as impacts occur, and they can respond as funding and as sediment sources become available for them to utilize, rather than being caught on your heels, experiencing an impact like we had over the past couple of weeks, and then trying to figure out what needs to be done, where it needs to be done, where we're going to get the money from, and what permits and plans, et cetera, might be required. In 2023, the first project was constructed under that comprehensive permit, and that was the Duxbury Beach Park Nourishment Project that was constructed from Blakeman's to the residence lot. And so again, like Tricia mentioned, getting additional sediment into that littoral system on a fairly sediment-starved beach, and we can talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But again, all projects listed here and that I've been discussing were all funded by matching funds from DBR and grant awards through the Coastal Zone Management Office. So talking a little bit more about this regional adaptation strategy. So we've got a pretty dynamic shoreline along Duxbury Beach Reservation. And like the 2017 study pointed out, like Tricia pointed out, like Chris pointed out, the processes that are impacting the ocean side and the bay side vary a bit. So we've got both ocean and bayside erosion, but for slightly different reasons. On the ocean side, it's primarily driven by wind and wave induced erosion. But over on the bay side, that wind wave erosion is a little bit less frequent. Obviously, we saw that in the last storm, but we have longer duration periods of inundation. And we also have a channel that comes very tight to the backside of the barrier beach that transports a lot of that, erodes and transports a lot of that sediment along the shore. And so improving the resilience of the barrier system involves adding nourishment to increase the sediment supply. There's nowhere along the beach that Duxbury Beach Reservation manages that doesn't need it. And that comprehensive permit that was secured will allow DBR to continue proactively nourishing as funds and sediment sources allow, and adaptively managing for impacts. This year's project is a little bit different and a little bit more niche and a little bit more focused. And that is on improving the resilience of the areas directly adjacent the Powder Point Bridge. So the figure that you see here at the right-hand side of the screen looks a little bit different now than when this aerial was shot back in 2016-17. But this year's project is going to involve construction of a cobble berm, mixed sediment grain size, nourishment project adjacent to Powder Point Bridge. And again, this project, even back in 2017, was recognized as a high priority near-term goal in that planning study. So it is a strategic action this year, and it's part of a larger regional approach. This project is primarily focused on improving the resilience of a highly erosional area, and especially the area directly adjacent, the parking area directly by the guard shack there. The channel is starting to come in tighter and tighter to the beach in that location. We do have some fringing salt marsh seaward, but the channel really does rip under the bridge in that location now, and that's really created a pinch point and accelerated the erosion that the beach and dune have experienced in that location. Like I mentioned before, the primary impacts include swift currents, wave attack and erosion, prolonged inundation, which when you super saturate the bank sediments and the dune sediments, it's not as though they're eroding in the way they would if a wave hits it, but when you super saturate that sediment and then the tide recedes, it all slumps. And so that's a lot of what we're seeing in this location too. The design that we came up with for this location is based on a review of the existing conditions on this section of beach. And Tricia and India's colleagues are very specific about making sure that anything that is proposed in a location as part of the grant program is a good match for what already exists on the beach. And that's really where this design came from, was making sure that it wasn't just sand and it wasn't just cobble, but a mix of those two sediment types that we use to nourish this section of the shoreline. So again, a little bit newer approach and a little bit more focused design this year than in previous years over on the ocean side. What you see in the figure, and it's a little bit hard to make out, but there is, it looks like here, it looks like a white line in that figure that is in very tight to the parking area, very tight to the flagpole. Oh, one of these. I don't want to turn anything off. Maybe it's this one. Oh, it is, okay. So the white line that you can see here in the figure, back in November, we came out and updated the existing condition survey for the site. Prior to the winter storm season, that was the edge of the scarp. I was just at the site tonight prior to coming by, and it has come in a bit tighter, closer to the parking area here. And so the timing is quite relevant to be talking about this tonight. The figure over here, the right-hand side of the screen shows the existing condition before the winter storms, which includes both that cobbly material, which tends to be, in general, a bit more stable within the system, and then the sandier material, which tends to be a little bit more mobile, shifting both on and offshore. And this combined approach, this mixing of the sediments, will likely offer a bit more resilience than sand would on its own. So we're looking at bringing in about 1,000 tons of material, 700 cubic yards or so, though that figure may change. Looking at Bo. And it's going to be a few trucks. So folks that are used to the trucks rolling to this location, it's fewer trucks than in previous years, at least for this specific project. And it's necessary to compensate for those sediment start conditions that Tricia outlined. When we armor the shore and we don't allow dunes and we don't allow coastal banks to erode, that cuts off that natural sediment supply that maintains beach elevation. And when we armor the shore, like Trish mentioned, and we cut off that sediment supply, the beach elevation tends to decrease and become narrow. And so that's the reasoning behind smaller scale nourishment projects that are really targeted, like this one, and then the larger regional nourishment projects that are trying to increase the volume of material within each of those littoral cells along the shoreline. And again, even though it's cobble, it may mobilize, but just because it's mobile within the system does not mean that it is lost from the system. One thing we should go back here to have a look at, and this was noted by CZM when we were on site discussing this project. In addition to the nourishment that would be placed in this gray hatched area, we also noticed that there was quite a bit of stormwater originating in the resident parking area that was coming through the entrance to the parking area adjacent to the guard shack and eroding the dune from the landward side. And so that's occurring during heavier rain events. And CZM was very clear with us that if we were planning to place nourishment here, we also should be considering the stormwater that's eroding it from the landward side, both from the parking area and back along Gurnett Road. If you're familiar with the washout, especially at this end of the project site, it's a result of that backflow of stormwater along Gurnett Road and over the edge of the parking lot in that location. So what's shown here is not just the nourishment, but also the implementation of a stormwater swale that will allow for a lot of that overland flow to infiltrate before it reaches the backside of the dune. And we're going to have a look at what we're planning for that to look like in just a moment. So for the mixed sand and cobble nourishment, we are looking at having the mix of sand and cobble overlap the scarp that's currently on site and overlap it just up here to meet the edge of the existing vegetation. And it's going to extend seaward at a gradual 3-to-1 slope and terminate above the high tide line. So this isn't going to be a nourishment project like we implemented last year at Blakeman's, where sand was placed below that high tide line. This all stays up above the high tide line. The sandy beach that's located seaward of that parking area is largely going to be maintained. So cobble is not going to be placed over the existing sandy beach. The primary access points next to the flagpole and guard shack are going to be maintained, but some of the secondary paths that have developed over the course of time represent flood pathways through the dune. So we don't want a Swiss cheese effect when the water surface elevations come up. And so some of those secondary pathways are going to be filled in and restored. And then restoration and revegetation plantings will be installed. And this type of design is consistent with other cobble berm projects that have been implemented on site. This is an area a couple thousand feet south of the Powder Point Bridge. And this material was placed in 2022 in an effort to shore up the edge of the roadway. There have been some overwash events and some need for maintenance in that location. But this is similar to the design that would be implemented to improve the resilience of the parking area and the bridge abutments. And the stormwater. So in an effort to reduce the erosion that's coming from the upland side, What you see here is the existing grade of the windrow of sand that exists between the parking area and the southbound travel lane of Gurnett Road. And so this material in that windrow would be excavated and beneficially reused as a part of the sand and cobble nourishment project. So the material stays on site and within the system. But we would create a bit of depth there, again, between the unpaved roadway, southbound lane of Gurnett Road, and the parking area, where we would backfill with a wetland soil with a veneer of sand over the top, and then vegetate that swale to be able to accept a portion of the stormwater. The photos that you see over on the right-hand side are of a project that was constructed as part of the CCM Resiliency Grant Program in Brewster, Massachusetts in 2015. This is the Breakwater Beach Phased Retreat Project. And so in order to manage stormwater from the relocated parking area, this swale was implemented along the edge of the parking lot, and the discharge point from stormwater was here. And then this parking lot that you can see up on the hill drained to this end of the swale. And the idea is to be able to create a very natural aesthetic, but to give the stormwater somewhere to go and somewhere to infiltrate rather than just running along a hardened surface to the point of least resistance, which in this case is the backside of the dune. I think I got it, with the exception of the new traffic pattern. So, but Brenda can go over that. So there will be, when the swale is constructed, rather than having a divided north-south lane at Gurnett Road, right when you jump onto the road south of the bridge, that'll become a two-way street in that location, just like the remainder of the road heading south. So just some key takeaways from the resiliency grant program and from what's planned this year. So this project is again in the spirit of the 2017 Coastal Processes and Resilience Study. One of the primary causes of this ongoing coastal erosion and these erosional hotspots is a deficit of that sediment within the coastal littoral cell. What we're finding is both on the bay side and on the ocean side. To help offset the deficit, nourishing with compatible sediment is logical within each of those cells, and it's not just a practice that's going on here, it's going on region-wide and throughout New England. And from a stormwater perspective, as our rain events become more frequent and intense, the stormwater will continue to impact the site. And so this stormwater feature, again, is in the spirit of that larger 2017 management plan. This particular nourishment, and I want to be clear about this, I mean, it's the nourishment in this location, it's nourishment occurring on the ocean side, it's nourishment adjacent to seawall. That is not on the DVR parcel, but the nourishment isn't what stops the erosion, but it does help to strengthen and improve the resilience of the landform in the long term. And that's what we're really gunning for here. And it helps to reduce damage to landward areas. In this case, I mean, if we had a view out the window tonight, we would be sheltered from any impacts by the presence of that barrier. So again, speaking to the importance of that nourishment. And as Tricia emphasized during her talk, although that nourishment ends up being redistributed through the system and shifts on and offshore, it is not lost from the system. And I guess I'm just, the more that I work with DVR, the more that I'm impressed by their approach to coastal management, which is quite comprehensive. So positioning themselves with the comprehensive permit to be able to respond to impacts as they occur and be able to leverage funding and various sediment sources as they become available has been a very sound approach, and I look forward to continuing that relationship. Right.
Thank you, Adam. I like to reflect on the COVID period. People learned a different language or they learned how to play an instrument. And my colleagues and I spent a year and a half writing every permit requirement we could possibly write up. But our joke is that we want to be flexible in management of a barrier beach. So that comprehensive permit now allows us to be proactive, which is usually not a stance that you're able to take. The next speaker I have the pleasure of introducing, and I won't even fake that I can set this up for you, is Brenna McLaughlin. Brenna is the Assistant Director for Duxbury Beach Reservation. I think the testament to Brenna is to say that I was hired in June of 2017, and at the first board meeting I went to in October, I said, I can't do this alone. I need to hire someone. That is probably the smartest thing I've done. Brenna has the ability to grasp topics that she doesn't know, become pretty comprehensive in a short matter of time. And she also has the ability to talk about a lot of complex conversations and topics as she's going to do today. Brenna McLaughlin. That was last weekend's photo, by the way. Was the resolution side that wasn't quote unquote impacted compared to the baseline.
All right, so I'm gonna finish this off this evening, run through some of what beach visitors are gonna see during construction. I'm gonna talk about what we're gonna see after one of those projects. I know people still go out in the winter, so I'll just give you a heads up. And then I'm gonna just talk about our next community forum that's coming up in about a month or so. So there are about 4 construction projects. I'm dividing Adams into 2 here.
Mine has the fewest trucks stuff.
All right. I'm not your other one. Yeah.
So on board kind of utilizing DVR property this winter. So the first is, as Adam mentioned, not a DVR project. It's just north of our property. It's the Duxbury Marshfield Seawall Nourishment Project. However, those folks are using DVR's northern parking lots up at our northern property boundary for staging and access. So you will see activity in that area, as well as trucks, moving to and from that area. We've got that cobble berm on either side of the Powder Point Bridge. So that's kind of part 1 of our CZM project this winter. Then part 2 is those stormwater infiltration swales along the small parking lots behind the guardhouse. And then the 4th is a DVR funded dune nourishment project that's going to be located kind of picking up where we left off last winter, but so across from the Powder Point Bridge down to about halfway to crossover 1. So those are the locations that we're kind of talking about with impacts this winter. So these 4 projects will take place basically between now. So the town's projects are already occurring through the end of March. And DVR's projects are going to be getting started end of this month, early February.
So overall, a reminder of work zones, that northern parking lot, or some folks call it the kind of non-resident OSD overflow lot, as it's used in the summer. The roadway all the way between that northern property line at the northern lot and crossover about to crossover one or a little bit north of there. Most of that's just gonna be trucks traveling. However, there are gonna be areas where trucks are going into parking lots or having to kind of back up or turn around, get up to the dune, things like that. So look out for those. The southern half of the resident overflow or that western dirt lot, as well as the bayside where the berm is going. That small parking lot behind the guardhouse and the bayside, and then the oceanside dune again between the bridge and about halfway to crossover one. So some temporary impacts, again, possibly for folks that are driving, walking, biking. Just be mindful of trucks sometimes having to stop or turn and exit the roadway, go up to the dune, turn around, that sort of thing. So we just ask that you just be patient, pause, give them space, let them do their thing, and they'll be able to get off the road more quickly. There is gonna be some altered traffic flow at the entrance to the back road south of the guardhouse, south of the bridge. I'm not construction, so I won't pretend to know exactly how that's gonna go. But there'll be signs and signage and cones. So just look out for that, and make sure you're following those directions and not just turning blindly down the back road. And then as Adam said, there will be a long-term change to that area, just making it a standard two-way road, rather than that divided road there. And then the parking impacts, again, just temporary during construction. There'll likely be no parking in the small parking lot behind the guardhouse during construction, the southern part of the resident overflow or that western dirt lot, and then the northern lot, which is already being used. So next up, I'll move away from construction and just talk briefly about our next community forum. So most of us are familiar with the recreational value of Duxbury Beach. We talked about that for those who joined us in December at the community forum. Tonight, we learned about the role of coastal landforms, barrier beaches, in protecting the coastline and the importance of these nature-based solutions in maintaining them. So next, we're gonna explore the economics, if you will, around Duxbury Beach. So we'll speak about the role it plays in protecting the towns of Duxbury, Plymouth, Marshfield, and Kingston from coastal storm impacts and dive into the new Duxbury Beach economic study. And that was prepared by Woods Hole Group and Industrial Economics out of Cambridge, Mass. So on the left, you can see the area that was covered by that study. So I'm just gonna give us a really quick teaser on it and don't ask me any economics questions after. Come to the forum, you'll learn more from the experts. So to create the report, Woods Hole Group and Industrial Economics looked at biophysical models that simulate coastal processes under different storm conditions. So they looked at, waves and flooding and all of that under different storm strengths and linked those with economic models to evaluate the cost of potential damages due to flooding, erosion, and wave energy. So the exercise assumed either continued investment in managing and maintaining Duxbury Beach for a fully intact barrier beach, or no active management of the barrier beach, resulting in a partially eroded or completely eroded barrier beach. It considered several different strength storms over present day conditions, as well as looking at 2050 conditions and 2070 conditions. And they used models to look at the flood extent probability. So Woods Hole Group created this model for the state that is a dynamic model. It takes into account decades of historic data about waves, erosion, storm surge, rather than kind of a static bathtub. It's called sea level rise model, which doesn't account for kind of all that other stuff, all those storm impacts that are going on. And the results of the analysis were used to develop costs associated with the avoided infrastructure damage for public, residential, and commercial facilities. So basically, the things that were benefiting from the presence of Duxbury Beach. So in the end, the study found that Duxbury Beach reduces risk to hundreds of homes and dozens of businesses and public infrastructure, including the Duxbury High School and library. On that map there, all those red dots that you can see are structures that benefit from the ongoing management of Duxbury Beach. So the presence of that fully intact barrier beach. The beach reduces storm-related damages on the order of millions of dollars per storm event by 2070 for years with multiple storms. Of course, the benefits are even greater. And it reduces costs of regular repairs and maintenance of roadways, docks, piers, and other infrastructure. And the beach itself supports houses and culturally significant sites down at its southern end, and access, which would be lost if the beach were not maintained, of course. So the takeaway, Duxbury Beach is not, the end all be all for coastal resilience on the South Shore, but it is an important kind of, arrow in the coastal resilience quiver for this area. So I'll just finish up this portion, saying thank you again for joining us tonight. If you, don't get your questions answered tonight, or you think of others, or want to learn more about the work DBR is doing, some of the stuff that Adam mentioned from past years, or get involved, feel free to reach out to us. I have our email up there. You can find us on social media, or sign up for our emails that go out on our website.
I think we're good. Let people see pictures of what happened over the weekend, maybe. So now I'm gonna ask our speakers to join up at the panel. This saves them from having to stare at all of you for the last hour, so. And you'll see that you're given little name cards. If you're lucky, you can take those home as a parting gift. And just to remind folks, so Brenda who just spoke at DVR, I always knew in there, okay, who are these people, which ones? So we have India and Trisha from CZAM and Adam from Woods Hole Group. And I have the pleasure of being moderator. And I'm sorry, I didn't know we had obstructed view seats. I hope you did get the discount for that. But we're happy to answer any questions. Yes, you.
Hi, I just,
If you wouldn't mind just saying your name.
Wendell Stern.
Thank you.
To the CCL folks and, what's all group, is it unusual for you to be dealing with essentially a private organization rather than a town? Because it seems that the DVR has taken on a tremendous amount of responsibility for making decisions and doing things to make the town more resilient. Is this unusual?
So just to, I'm doing this and people can come up and ask their questions as well. I feel like sometimes people are more apt to ask a question from their seat, but let me just repeat it. The question was, does CZAM and Woods Hole work usually with private entities and nonprofits that own beaches? Because it seems unusual that you have a private entity that's working and paying to protect a municipality.
But I don't know. The East End Fleet Churro, P-Town, Cape Cod Bay side.
The answer is no, we're the only.
Well, I'm just-
We don't need to.
So is this on?
No.
Is that better?
No. Do you want to try?
Oh,
this
wait.
one?
So,
Hello? No.
how about that one?
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, great. So through the grant program, as India presented, nonprofits that own vulnerable coastal property that's open and accessible to the public are eligible applicants. We do have other nonprofits that we've worked with and partnered with through the grants. As part of their application to the program, they do have to submit letters of support from the town in which the project is being implemented in. And we have gotten wonderful letters from various stakeholders from the towns to support the nonprofits' work on their property. And it's not just individual communities or nonprofits that are undertaking these projects. We have a number of regional partnerships up and down the coast that are working together to address a lot of their coastal challenges as well. Adam just reminded me of one on the Cape. It's a partnership between the 4 towns on the outer Cape that are working on a regional management plan. So there are a number of different ways in which these projects get implemented. And again, to be funded through this program, the applicants really have to demonstrate that there is a lot of support for the project.
One of the things that's nice, I've had the opportunity to speak in front of other select boards, in addition to Duxbury. Kingston has no problems writing a letter of support really quickly for us, as they get a lot of benefit. But also I like to call the town of Plymouth and say, will you write a letter of support? You'll get the sand in like 40 years. So again, they don't have a problem writing it as well, but I think the key of what Tricia said, and I was thinking about as Adam was speaking, is that the answer for protection really needs to be regional. As you heard, it's a sediment-starved system. We're not getting a lot of sand from the north. And gone are the days of this is my beach and we need to protect it. We really need to be thinking of South Shore, which is why I went and spoke to the select board of Kingston. And why we need to have these relationships with the other towns, because we really need to think as a group. Sand just doesn't arrive in one location. It starts from somewhere and goes from somewhere. But all those trucks are because we don't have sand naturally coming in. So I'm sorry, there's a gentleman. Yes, sir. If you wouldn't mind just saying your name.
Rick Storer, resident of Duxbury. This may be a little bit out of the purview of the Duxbury Beach Reservation. Maybe it applies to the purview of the coastal zone management, but from the water, one of the most glaring examples of erosion affecting the whole length of Duxbury Beach is at the Gurnet, where there's a stone reinforcing wall that's been brought about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way around the Gurnet sand cliffs. But there's a sharp discontinuation, and I've been told, well, that's federal land. And that's why the feds have not agreed to spend any money. So I'm just curious if anyone was familiar with that issue of, has it been the private residents of the Gurnet that have funded the reinforcing wall around the 3/4 of the Gurnet? And is that the problem, that the federal government will not step up to reinforce the remaining portion by the lighthouse? And if so, what can be done to get the federal government to take some responsibility?
Do you want me to take this one?
Sure.
So the question is regarding the Gurnet revetment that begins right pretty much even with the Gurnet guardhouse, and it runs south but stops before you get to the federal land owned by the Department of Interior, managed by the Coast Guard, and about to be bequeathed to a private organization. I say that because it's not for sale. So long story short, that was privately funded by multiple homes in front of the revetment. The revetment didn't continue because it was federal land. And now, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of the lighthouses are being replaced. There's a lot of electronics. There's no more light keepers and Fresnel lenses. So what the feds are doing, the Department of Interior, is they're offering up lighthouses to folks that are nonprofits that will continue the work of education and allowing people to access. Because that property has been managed for years and years by Bud Light organization that just recently acquired Bud Light a couple of years ago. They also are going to be acquiring Gurnett, and then it will be a private, it'll be owned by a nonprofit, a 501c3. But that is the short reason why the revetment didn't come. And it's because the feds didn't deem that as a project that they were going to pay for. But now it could continue if the new owners determined that that's what they wanted to fundraise for. And they haven't passed papers yet on that. The government needs to do some work on the site before they can legally give it over to somebody. Yes, somebody in the back.
Kevin Walsh, and I'm part of Project Very Bud Light. We've been working on that revetment project for a long time, and once we acquire a lighthouse, and I think that's in, and they get through their soil remediation for whatever contaminants they have, that's we will want to vote that. We need more money.
That last speaker just confirmed Bud Light will be acquiring it, and when that happens, the next step sounds like they'll be looking at doing that revetment project. Yes. Yes, sir.
Hi, Brian Glennon, member of the select board. This is my question personally. Maybe this is for Adam or Tricia. So I heard a couple of comments tonight about the system that the sediment is in. Can you describe a little bit more about what the overall system is and where Duxbury Beach lies in that system? And then related to that is I heard a couple of comments about the system needing more sediment or sediment starved. Can you explain a little bit why, to the extent you know, why the system is starved? So, thanks.
No, just repeat
First
the
one,
question.
and I'll take the second
There's a gentleman
Or I
asking
can
a
start for
two-part
the second
question.
one.
Where
So,
is that
the
area
question
where we're
was
talking about sediment transport? And then, and I'm paraphrasing, I know they heard it. And second, what is this phrase of sediment starved, and what is causing where this sediment starvation, I've never used that phrase, why there's sediment starvation?
Probably Green Harbor, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're
Yeah.
discussing.
We're discussing that littoral cell where the start stop might be.
Yeah,
Make sure you speak correctly.
okay. We're thinking Green Harbor, Marshfield, which is right north of where Duxbury Beach begins to the south. So kind of within that system because of the inlet there. So that's kind of the start of one littoral cell that works its way down south toward the end of the Duxbury Beach.
If I could just say, so when you're referring to Duxbury Beach,
The
not
bear-
Duxbury Beach Reservation property, but further north.
Yes, yes. So, so again, I think the sediment, so that's kind of the transport within that particular compartment or cell along the coast. But you do have sediment being transferred from other reaches along the coast. So it's part of a larger littoral cell as well. So that's why the nourishment projects from Hall, North Situate, Marshfield, Duxbury, Plymouth, Long Beach, which have either been recently constructed or are in construction or will be constructed soon. All of that sediment being added to a sediment starved system, which is the state that we're in, provides that benefit of sediment transport and keeping the sediment on the beaches and dunes and be able to keep up with sea level rise and storms and provide the protection to the mainland coastline. And Adam can definitely add more to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I think that's a good summary. And I think that if we think about on the micro scale, the littoral cell that Duxbury Beach sits within would be from the inlet of Green Harbor south to Gurnett Saquesh. And there's that physical barrier with Green Harbor, and there's the end of the beach to the south. So that would be kind of the micro cell. But like Tricia said, that's just one micro cell within a larger regional area. But if we're just going to talk about our region here from Green Harbor South, when you look at the primary direction of sediment transport, everything from approximately, and this is very approximate, but approximately from the Bay Ave ramp, most of that material moves from north to south down towards Duxbury Beach Reservation. From Bay Ave north up to Green Harbor, it's a little more mixed. Sometimes the longshore rate of sediment transport flips in that location a bit. But if most of the sediment is moving from north to south, and the first mile or so south of Bay Ave is heavily armored, there isn't a naturally occurring source of sediment that's eroding out of that landform to naturally nourish the beach. Seawalls are put in place for a reason. They do a very good job of protecting hard infrastructure. But like Tricia indicated in her talk, sometimes there are some unintended consequences associated with that. And in this case, by cutting off that source of sediment, beach elevations, when they're in a sediment-starved system, have a tendency to decrease in elevation and narrow. And that's why if you walk along the seawall at high tide, you've got waves against the seawall. But if you were to take a walk along an unarmored section of shoreline closer down to Gurnett Saquewish, or out at High Pines, you're going to have a beach at high tide that's not fully inundated. And so I don't know if that helped to answer your question, but that would be one of the reasons why this section of beach is sediment starved. And it's not unique to just the seawall in this location. We live along a very heavily armored shoreline, and it's not just an issue that we run into here, but it's an issue that we run into statewide and throughout all of New England. Sure.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Søren Benson, and I lived in Duxbury for 40 years plus. Enjoyed our beach down on Stanley Shore and also the big beach. And I went to a meeting recently also about Duxbury Beach Reservation, and I raised the question about jetties. I've seen a lot of beaches all over the world, especially in my home country, Denmark, and also down on the South Shore. Why can't jetties be used out there? I was told at that time because they're prohibited in Massachusetts. So maybe you can explain a little about jetties.
So the question is from a gentleman who hails from Denmark that has more coastline breakthrough breakthrough innovations when it comes to coastal management than many of the other countries. The question is, why can't jetties be used and built to protect the beaches?
Take a stab.
I'll take it. Thanks for your question. So jetties are a little bit different than seawalls. They are still, considered a coastal engineering structure, but they really function to trap sediment coming down from, coming down drift, down current. They build up the beach on one side, and on the other side of the jetty, you can see the, more erosion occurring. So these are typically placed in areas that need to remain open, such as inlets and like at the Cape Cod Canal for federal navigation purposes. So we can't put these structures up on coastal barriers because they are protected under the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act. Coastal barriers are resource areas and yeah, protected under those regulations.
Are they prohibited in Massachusetts? That's what
Only on certain landforms. So just as a follow-up, so the resource, so under the Massachusetts Wetland Protection Act, there are different types of resource area classifications. You've got beaches, dunes, barrier dunes, salt marsh, and each of those different types of resource area have different rules and regulations associated with them. So the hard coastal engineering structures like jetties or revetments or seawalls are prohibited on barrier beaches and dunes, but they might be allowed on other types of features, like glacial deposits or coastal banks or areas where they're already existing, but construction of new hard structures on a dune is currently a prohibitive action. And I don't make the rules, Trish doesn't make the rules, but we're trying to operate within the rules.
I can add something
Sure.
to that, yeah.
Yeah.
I can add a little bit to that from a policy perspective. Jetties, they have unintended consequences. They stop that sediment from moving downstream from that alongshore transport. So if you put up a jetty, that is going to trap sediment there, but that is going to starve downstream the beaches down there and cause increased erosion down there. So it has impacts to your neighbors. And because of that, I would say not just our office, but states up and down the East Coast are moving away from recommending jetties as erosion control measures and moving towards these softer nature-based measures such as beach nourishment, because there's just not as much unintended consequences that can cause like really severe issues downstream, so.
And I've got one final point to add, and it's relative to the jetty question and why it might or might not work along this section of shoreline, and it jumps back to the selectmen's question as well. So on this barrier where we're already sediment starved, there would only be so much material that could possibly build up on that jetty, because we already don't have a lot of it in the system. And secondary to that, barrier beaches tend to, over the course of let's call it decadal scale, decades, or up to a century, the long-term movement of this landform is actually landward into Duxbury Bay. So a jetty that might be constructed now may be sitting seaward of the barrier in another 100 years, unless it were continually extended longer and longer. And getting back to just this question of sediment starvation within the system, this is gonna be bad. Nobody quote me on this, but when our office and the state were looking at this littoral cell in this area, they were able to determine that the sediment starvation, like what it would take to actually build this beach back to where it should be if it wasn't sediment starved, was on the order of, is it 4 to 6 million cubic yards? Just about, yeah. We need a lot of sand. And so it's sediment starved to the point where the state is actively investigating whether material could potentially be leveraged from offshore sources and pumped back onshore to try to make up for that sediment depth. But it is a tangent. I'm sorry. We went from jetties to sediment starvation.
My witness, we will get that passed to Massachusetts, yes.
Yep.
My name is Becky Kamada. When you were talking about the seawalls and what you were just talking about in terms of bringing sand or materials from deeper out back in, is the seawall essentially letting the sand go back out into the ocean as opposed to having it come on and feed the sediment of the beaches into?
So the question is, what happens to the sand that's where the seawall is? And is the seawall, because of its shape or its verticalness, what is that impacting for sand?
Yeah, sure. So like there was a good figure that Trish shared during her presentation that showed when you have a vertical seawall here, as the wave comes up, that energy is transferred vertically, and then it comes down, straight down with force. And as that wave energy comes up and then is refracted down, that material right at the toe, right at the base of the seawall, is fluidized. And so when that wave refracts up, comes down with force, fluidizes the material at the toe of the structure, and then sucks it seaward. It's not that and then the water recedes and sucks that material seaward. It's almost a physics equation. So it's not the seawall that's necessarily resulting in that direct loss of sediment seaward of it, but it is the physics of the water interacting with the seawall that then pulls that sediment seaward. And the reason that that's an issue is because if those waves were interacting with a dune, or if they were interacting with a coastal bank, rather than coming straight up vertically, hitting the sand and sucking it seaward, it would be naturally eroding the landform. And so whatever was lost from the toe of it would be replaced by that material that eroded. So that's where we run into an issue with cutting off the source of sediment.
Yes, sir.
So again, it's sort of a related question, but
I'm sorry, your name?
Rick Storer.
Sorry, thank you.
A few years ago, we bought a beautiful coffee table book about Duxbury Beach, and as I recall, the first chapter discussed the geological history of the beach.
Mhm.
Let's say 300 years ago, it was maybe 100 or 200 yards further offshore, and then it's moving in. And that introductory chapter led me to believe that barring human intervention, Duxbury Beach would disappear in another 300 years, just, a new shoreline would form along the bay. So, but now we have human intervention of the type that you're executing so beautifully. And I'm wondering, are we really going to be able to interrupt geologic history here in the long run?
Well, hopefully, I won't live to be geologic. The question from the gentleman, and excuse my paraphrasing, the important people are hearing the full question. I shouldn't say that. I just insulted everyone on Zoom. But basically, from a geologic standpoint, the beach is moving. Are we? I have no idea.
No,
I
I think the question,
answer.
yeah.
I'm trying to reiterate.
Yeah.
You guys know it, but are we keeping up with that? Are we disturbing with the natural processes?
So you're correct in that Duxbury Beach on geological timescales has rolled over on itself and migrated landward. The activities that we do today are really meant to try to restore and enhance what is a degraded system right now. So adding the nourishment, like Adam was saying in his presentation, and I was trying to allude to, adding volume is what the beaches need right now in order to be able to keep up with the coastal processes, with the erosion, with the storm overwash, with the dune migration. Barrier beaches are really fragile, they're dynamic, and they're constantly reshaping in response to these coastal processes at work. So, like we were saying, we're in a sediment-starved state right now. Adding volume to the beaches does help the system maintain its function to provide storm damage protection and flood control.
And it goes to when I first opened that our goal is to maintain the landform, not in a perfect current footprint, but we're focused on kind of our elevation. It took me a while when I started, I'm like, bigger, taller is better. But if you think of the dune as a trapezoid, you want the width of the trapezoid. It doesn't really matter how high it is if that gets knocked over. But if you have a wider footprint, if you will, or a dune, then that can erode naturally. So we're not trying to maintain kind of a certain distance, if you will, from east to west, but we are trying to maintain the slopes and the elevation to something that can manage the storms. But obviously, we're going to have bigger ones like we did in March of 2018. That hit us twice and 3 times total in 2 weeks. And people have to understand that when people say it's a 100-year storm, that was a perfect example of how we had 2 100-year storms in a month. So I think everybody's like, yeah, 100 years, but that's what we're trying to do, kind of maintain the landform, not necessarily in the footprint, but at a slope and an elevation.
I don't think you were calling against the intervention. hope we can succeed in interrupting geological
I
processes.
think it's gonna still move this way, but we won't notice. I should only speak for myself. Yes,
Andre Martini, full disclosure, I'm the director of the beach. One thing to point out, for people to remember, when you look at the history of this beach, and it's not so long ago, 91, we had two major storms that flattened the beach. So when you look at the dune, much of the dunes that you see out there are new engineered dunes with a lot more sand brought in than we ever are bringing in any of our current projects. A lot of those two major restoration projects were funded by the federal government, who no longer is looking to fund us anymore. So that's one of our big problems, is that, back then, when we had a major storm damage, we had a federal government funding us. We no longer have it. One of the biggest questions that Adam, you just sort of touched on it, which I think is a huge issue, is the source of sand. When we do these projects and hundreds of trucks of sand are being brought on the beach, they have to come from somewhere. And as we just have found out, how the competition for sand, because we're not allowed to just put any sand, right? You have to have a compatible sand that's, reasonable, that looks like the sand that's, made up of the beach. So where do you get that sand? You can go to landers, you can get, but they're very, very limited sources. One major storm now, and everybody is going to be competing for that same sand. The cost is going to go skyrocket. So what you touched on, I think politically, there has to be a lot of pressure on offshore sand mining, because without that, there will not be able to maintain our beaches or any of the other beaches up and down Massachusetts coast. And just keep in mind, I'm not sure if we're the only state that doesn't allow it, but certainly Florida, when you look at all of their beaches, the sand gets mined from offshore, gets put on the beach, a couple of years later, it migrates offshore and they put it back. So it's a cycle. And we need to look at that, because if you don't do that, we will not be able to continue this process.
and that was one of the reasons we worked so hard for our existing permit. So now we stand ready if somebody's putting in a development. I used to use the example, somebody builds a mall, but there are no malls being built. Everybody's on Amazon, which is great for people who work for Amazon. So not insulting our tech expert here, but that's why some of the projects that are in town are so great for us, and I don't mean DVR, I mean for the town. If we can keep that product in town, I like to say that delivery equals distance times diesel. So diesel used to be $6.50 when we did our project last year. It's now about $4.58 a gallon. But it's also, when you're looking at, your 10-wheelers, your 18-wheelers, you'll be lucky if you get 10 miles to a gallon on that. So the farther they have to travel, the more expensive the product is. I mean, that's why, hats off for Duxbury Construction, working with Duxbury Beach Reservation. We're about to do another nourishment project, and that's all coming from painfully, fundraise $50 here, $25 there. That is all now going into the beach, and the only reason we can do it is that there happens to be a site that needs to that's being developed for several homes, and then we were able to work with the contractors. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we can win a bid with the town for their new garage project.
And just one point, because I do want to give the Coastal Zone Management Office a lot of credit to that end. I do know that there is work being done to complete some of the investigations that are necessary to be able to identify suitable offshore sources. However, then we come back to the question of the regulations. And what the areas inland under the ocean will ultimately be designated as, and what allowable activities can commence in those locations. Because right now, a lot of what's under the ocean is considered fisheries habitat. And is fisheries habitat. And so how do we work within the confines of the regulation to potentially leverage a source of sand offshore the beach?
Yes.
Hi, David Amory. I think we're speaking about gallons per mile, probably miles, yeah. You've done some amazing work over the last few years. The sacrificial dune, which was done in 2019, I think, 2020. And then, of course, the beach nourishment that's in place, and then the nourishment that's going to be continuing. How are they performing? And how do you monitor them? I don't know, from the distance, it looks to me as if the sacrificial dune to the south is actually grown, which is so amazing to see that. So, based on how you're monitoring this, how do you adjust the design as well? In some other locations has the amount of sand not been satisfactory, and you modify how you do that, or like here, it certainly appears out here that whatever's been done has worked very well. And I'm no expert, but it's just looking at it, it's like, wow, known these beaches for a long time. And it's really exciting to see that. So just curious about how they're performing now, especially after the last couple of storms. And then, well, that's it.
All right. So the question is kind of two-part for the projects that we've done. How have they really sustained themselves, or have they? And the second is, how do you monitor? How do you know what's working and what's not working? So anecdotally, I'm going to answer, and I can answer all of these as well, but our saving grace for the crossover 1-2 project, which I just think is amazing, and everyone should, if you walk away, take this with you. If you go out on the beach in the winter right now, you'll see what Trisha was talking about those oblique angles. You know, the waves don't come right at you. They do that little curl and they come at an angle. Well, right now in the winter, there are these magnificent cobble berms that are set up by Mother Nature, if you will. That's what protected our crossover project that first year. I was like, oh, it's all gonna go away. I'm gonna get tired. And all these perfect sets of cobble. And if you look at it right now, even on Google Earth, you look down at the winter and you can see these perfectly set up. And then in April, I'm like, gosh, everyone's gonna be mad. There's cobble on the beach. Where's the sand? And this is where Trisha needs to come in and say, don't worry, Chris, this is the winter profile. But that winter profile winds up protecting the crossover. And our good grace for crossover 1-2 is we didn't have a storm for over a year. So it was a perfect way for our first nourishment project to start under this new package. Some of the great stuff.
Well, I'll be really brief, and then you can maybe talk about the monitoring. Sure. So with regard to the design, I will preface this that I am not a coastal engineer, but we have very talented coastal engineers in our office and really advanced modeling tools that they can use to basically build out a design profile on the computer and then be able to simulate various storm effect or storms interacting with that profile. To see how much a given elevation and slope might erode if it were hit by a certain intensity storm. And that's what our engineers utilize to be able to optimize the designs that are ultimately built out on the beach. But there is a difference between what would optimally be built and what can be funded and the amount of sand that can be sourced. And so each time that we build out one of these projects, we look at what we would optimally build, and then we modify that slightly relative to the amount of funding and amount of sand available. In a very general sense, the beach and dune profiles that we're constructing remain resilient to overwash to up to a 25-year storm event. So a storm event that has a 4% chance of occurring in a given year. Anything beyond that would result in an overwash and a breach. But I think that's also a testament to DBR's pursuit of this comprehensive permit, which would allow them to be able to respond to and proactively respond to a breach or an overwash event.
I'll also add that the past 5 years have been relatively mild winters. So that has also given the beach a chance to build up a little bit more.
From a monitoring point of view, we drink the same Kool-Aid as CZM. So for projects done under grants, monitoring is required. Because the state isn't in the habit of just giving money away. They need to know like what happened and what projects did. So CZM requires a 3-year monitoring. DDR is enacted a 5-year monitoring. Don't tell the people that work with me. But there's multiple. So we look at changes to slope, elevation. We look at vegetative growth. So there's quadrats that are out there. If you look at Prosper 1 and 2, you'll see these random white fiberglass posts. Those delineate where we're measuring for vegetative growth. We look for Munsell soil testing, the color of the sand. A lot of people are like, oh, use construction sand. So like, sand. But after 2 summers, if not 1, it turns to a lighter color. So we constantly want to see, did we maintain that elevation we put in? What did the slope? Last year, our project was really different for us because we did not only dune, but beach nourishment. So we purposely were putting sand below high tide because as Trisha said, that sand moves. And the whole idea is to get that wave to break and break up the energy before it hits the beach. So it was fine that we didn't see it 3 weeks after we put it in because you could start to see the waves crash. Especially like north of Blakeman's when I first started doing it, all the waves are crashing before it even got to the beach. So that's a little bit harder to monitor because it's obviously below high tide. But we're going to be monitoring to do it and we take photos, which is really the most impressive thing. Because you can see the different bursts of vegetation. In our world, grass is king because it holds sand in place. So I just realized the time, but I blame it all on them. And it's 2:19, so we have time for 1 or
Do have
2 questions.
2 questions online.
Hmm.
Otherwise, we
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay. Just have to show. Okay, so this first one has a little bit of build up to it, and then I'll say what the question is. So this is from Chris Kennedy. He's out on Martha's Vineyard or from Martha's Vineyard. On the vineyard, we have had a couple of major storm impacts, one on South Beach and one at Long Point Wildlife Refuge in West Duxbury. At South Beach and Edgartown, CZM, the town, and the trustees of reservations recently restored a primary dune and the entrance to Norton Point Beach at the cost of $350,000. It was completely wiped out during the last 3 storms. At Long Point, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers restored a 1/3 of a mile of primary dunes after removing tons of World War II bombs. Must have been exciting. That dune was lost in the last storm. That restoration cost taxpayers close to $1 million. My question is, in high velocity beaches such as Duxbury Beach or these Martha's Vineyard beaches, what is the answer to mitigating extreme storm damage? Soft armoring or wave attenuation structures? Does it make sense to spend millions of dollars to replenish storm and cobble? I think maybe that means sand and cobble. Are there additional measures that could be added to help these highly exposed beaches? Pass that over.
Got an idea.
I would respond to this that I still think there's a tremendous amount of value and benefit in restoring the beaches and even in high energy wave areas with a softer response. as opposed to a hard structure or wave attenuation
Yeah.
device, which typically I
Assuming a hard.
believe would
structure.
need a much shallower tidal range in order to be more effective. Again, it's about adding volume to the system. It does appear that after that is material is placed and a storm comes and washes it out, it does seem that it just disappears. But as we've been saying tonight, it does remain in the system. It still is providing a storm prevention function when it is offshore and helping to break the waves before they reach the coastline. As far as, solutions, I feel like these are, helping to buy us time as we figure out a more longer term solution to these really difficult challenges. It's important to protect, Atlantic Ave, that road on the south shore of Martha's Vineyard, as well as the access road on Duxbury Beach Reservation. We have a ton of infrastructure and buildings and utilities that people rely on. And as, we figure out how we're going to really address the climate change challenges in the future, whether that's, 2050 or 2070 and beyond, because it's not going to stop. I feel like we are definitely helping to buy time to protect these natural resources and our infrastructure.
I think from Duxbury Beach, if I asked if I could change the name, I think the third week of my employment, can we just call it Barrier Beach? Because though it has access, it's protecting this town and not just this town. In the economic report, I was a little shocked on all those buildings in red that you couldn't see because we purposely didn't zoom in and horrify people, but there's a lot of properties that are in Plymouth, and I'm not speaking for Head Sagebrush, talking East Bay Grill, which happens to be a favorite of mine. They're circled in red, but it makes me realize that, it's access. Everybody wants to go on it. Everybody enjoys it. I live on the water for a reason. I commute up from Cape Cod. I wouldn't do that if we were inland. I need to have salt water around me. But we need this Barrier Beach if we want to, continue protecting the town, and we all need to understand that I don't think we're ever going to, beat this nut, but I think we can slow it down and work as a group, whether it's regionally or in the town. So it's not just the solutions of Duxbury Beach Reservation, it's the Coastal Resiliency Task Force that's there. It's folks that are funding, matching for grants. It's really a whole collective unit in order to ensure that kids have the same and beautiful access that we do, and access to croissants as well.
One more on the item.
I think this one was kind of covered before, but I'll just ask it because it came in just after, so just in case there was some other component that you all would like to add. So on the issue of offshore mining, it becomes an issue of whose ox is being gored. I'm a commercial lobsterman who depends on sea bottom topography. So if you dredge the bottom to mine sand to restore beaches, you are disrupting our sea bottom, which is the habitat for our commercial fisheries. What's the answer?
Can I just tackle that for 2 seconds? Because I think, and I see the pictures of the Outer Banks and I'm jealous of North Carolina. I'm sure it's a lovely place, but Duxbury is just a straight, but they have to pump their sand. And there's a couple things. One, we don't know what that sand is. We don't know if it's even compatible. So before we even look at that, as Andre had pointed out, we need to go and sample it, just like you have to sample a quarry. If it winds up being too silty or too sandy, that's not what we have on our beach right now. So it needs to be matched. Second, it might not be the end all be all. So imagine if there was a big atoll or a big mountain of sand and it was in front of our beach. If we took that mountain down, we're gonna be the ones that are the first recipients of the impact of that. So there needs to be, you know, is it compatible? What would happen with the modeling if we took that sand away? And then there's so many layers of ownership underneath, and the last thing we'd want to do is impact somebody else's livelihood. That's why it took us during the entire COVID period to get these permits, because it's marine fisheries, you know, everybody and their brother is weighing in on it to make sure that nobody sticks a sump pump too soon, for this, sticks a vacuum in the sand and puts it on the beach. So it's a kind of a tough nut to crack.
Sure.
We have a quick observation.
Yes, sure.
Commissioner White, I don't know that anyone here is old enough to remember, but that dunes were 6 or 8 feet higher than the beach, just before we were in the dune. What we're facing with, in essence, is remediating the damage the Army did to that beach during World War II. By digging foxholes, sandbagging, setting up machine guns, and practicing. And after the war, during the last part of it, we ran all over those dunes, picked up the grass, and essentially destroyed the vegetation. And we're remediating that now, trying to add the sand back that was eroded by the destruction. Oh, what kind of joke can you put on that?
Well, to somebody's point for the crossover project, the way visually you can tell that it works so well is that dune was completely barren, right, when it was built, and they put in sand fencing, aka snow fencing, but there's sand, it's called sand fencing. It's 4 feet high. There's nothing better for me than to drive from down south from the bridge to cross over to, you can't see the fence because the sand has built up. Are we at the levels you were at? Absolutely not. The dune buggies of the 70s probably did that, but now there's reg, so hopefully, again, it's the vegetation that don't drive on the vegetation, drive on the sand, have the fun, and let's make sure that sand holds, the grass holds the sand together.
I would say in general, as we're starting to wade into these trickier issues, such as should we do offshore sand mining? You know, is it worth putting money into the beach? That the state is now taking a more comprehensive approach to this issue as climate change exacerbates all these plans, just like how DVR is taking comprehensive issue to their beach. We're undergoing a lot of work right now under the Resilient Coast Plan to come up with a strategy moving forward for these difficult issues. And in developing this plan, our office is talking to every stakeholder group in the state really thoroughly. And we're going to try to hear all sides and come up with a plan that can minimize the amount of losses due to climate change over, for the long haul. So I would encourage you all to, participate in your local government, vote in state elections, talk to your state representatives, attend public hearings for these kinds of issues so that your voice is heard as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I hope that you join us again. Big hand to our expert panel. Appreciate you coming out on a Thursday night. And I hope that you join us at the end of February to hear about the economic analysis and what we've seen for that. Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear that. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. When she mentioned it in the call,